This is going to be a history lesson for some of you. And I'm looking, just judging by age, it's probably going to be the case. For others, it's going to be a little trip down memory lane, right? So we're going to talk about, what is the origin? How do we get to Patch Tuesday? Why does this thing even exist for me to destroy it here today? So number one, if we look at VBScript, and it's kind of funny because I saw this post earlier today on Twitter. It's about, year 2000 was so great, all these things that occurred, is anything missing? I was like, yeah, the shitload of vulnerabilities that were going on because of VBScript. If you look at these, just show of hands real quick as I go through these. Who remembers Melissa? All right, the I Love You virus. Code Red? Nimda. Why was Nimda named Nimba? Nimda. Right, admin backwards, all right? Class, all these occurred in the year 2001, and it was like one after another after another. We were just getting hammered with this shit nonstop, and guess who's getting the big black eye in all of this? Microsoft, yeah, exactly, it was Microsoft. So Bill Gates came out with this memo in 2002, early 2002, I think, yeah, January. And it was basically a cease and desist order to all of his developers, stating that basically they were to go through and do a code review. Didn't matter what the product was, what product group owned it, period. No more development. This went on for like 6 months. All they were doing is security, architecture, and code review. They were doing the shit that they should have been doing to begin with, right? Secure coding. So from there, what ended up happening is this hodgepodge of various patching products, feature packs, solutions being brought in from Microsoft. And it got really confusing really quick. How many of you worked with SMS back in the day? How many of you know what SMS stands for? Not short message system or whatever that is. Systems Management Server was Microsoft's earlier version of SCCM. How many of you guys use SCCM? Know what it is? Okay. You're going to get some more exposure to that because that's kind of what a lot of this is going to be based on. But we had everything from the Windows Update web app, critical update notification, the SMS feature pack, automatic updates, the Windows Update agent, and then finally Windows Server Update services. Whew! And that was like in a 2-year span. How confused do you think that marketplace was? So all of this ends up leading into Patch Tuesday in October of 2003, where Microsoft said that basically we're going to give some consistency because all this shit that was going on wasn't working. And it gave the consumer, the users, the enterprises, no structure, no format. How many change control meetings do you guys like to attend? My number on that is zip, right? And we're going to talk about that later too, because I think there's ways for you guys to get out of a lot of that around patching. So basically, Microsoft brought this on. Now, over the past 15 years, now can you believe it's been 15 years that we've been at this? Yeah. Over the past 15 years, a few of the vendors have, other vendors, third-party vendors, have also got on this, right? But not everyone. And even of those that have kind of followed into Microsoft's, Patch Tuesday, some of them don't even do it on a monthly basis. Some of them it's every 2 months. Some of them it's once a quarter. Some of them it's biannually. So even that gets a bit confusing, right? So 15 years later, we still can't get this stuff right. I told my wife I wouldn't cuss in this presentation because I'm on St. Mary's campus, but I can't help myself sometimes. Now this is all information gleaned from an article that was just published, what is this, June, so a couple months ago. You know, nearly 60% of organizations over the past 2 years have suffered a data breach, and their statement is that it was basically for a vulnerability which they hadn't patched yet. 60%. They hadn't patched yet. They knew the vulnerability was out there. They knew it was applicable to their environment. They knew the criticality of that vulnerability, and yet they still weren't patching. Half of those, or another study from the Ponemon Institute, said that they were hit with one or more data breaches in the past 2 years. You know, half of the organizations. And that, I think if we go into further detail, there's like some 2,000 organizations worldwide studied in that. 30% or 34% of those said they knew their systems were vulnerable to the attack prior to it occurring in that data breach. So we have some horrible, horrible statistics here coming from, you know, talk to your organizations around the world. Some 86% of the vulnerabilities reports came with patches last year. So they have these vulnerable systems. They know that they're applicable to their environment. There's patches for 86% of them, and yet they're still not being applied. You know, all this is just saying we have this compounded problem here. So clearly, these 0 days are really not as much of an issue as they were before, right? You know, 0 days used to be that oh shit moment, and you know, we're into firefighting mode immediately. And we were going through this on a very fast clip, recurring almost monthly with one vendor to the next. But how many 0 days have we seen this year? It's been very, very few, right? So what is the problem then? First, we have to come to grips with the facts. The other 90%, I like to call it. So I hate to disappoint you guys, but Microsoft really is not the problem. It really isn't. In fact, Microsoft, over the past 15 years, has become very good at what they're doing. They have the largest, most complex and evolved SOC in existence. And if you want to argue that with me and start talking about FireEye and some of these others, I will put your shit in check like nobody's business. There are billions of sensors that they are monitoring and aggregating data from every single month. There's nobody who comes anywhere close to Microsoft's intel when it comes to security threats and vulnerabilities that exist. And it's not just their products. They're looking at everything. So let's get into some of the statistics here. So when we look at vulnerability reports, and this is basically taken from cvedetails.com. You can use NIST, MITRE, whoever. All the data is the same, right? It's just which feed you want to consume from. But I pulled all this from CVE Details last night, so this is, you know, all the data that exists. In 2015, Microsoft accounted for 9% of the vulnerabilities that were reported by the top 50 vendors by NIST, MITRE, CVEdetails.com. 2016, only 7% of all those vulnerabilities were attributed to Microsoft. And in 2017, last year, 8%. So in reality, in 9% to date for this year. So in reality, no more than 10% of all those vulnerabilities reported have been attributed back to Microsoft. And when I say Microsoft, I mean anything that has the Microsoft name associated with that particular executable, environment, whatever. So, you know, Windows 7, Windows 10, 2016, 2012, you know, 2008, Office, Internet Explorer, Edge, you name it. If it has Microsoft's name associated, no less than or no more than 10%. So what does that mean when it comes to all of our patching efforts? Well, most corporations today use WSUS for patching, right? Right? Show of hands, how many of you guys have WSUS in your environment to patch your Microsoft environment? Okay, so it is a very capable solution. I'm not going to take away from it at all. It is, for SMBs, small to medium-sized businesses, a perfect fit. Essentially, you just synchronize it with windowsupdate.com, pull down the updates, approve which ones you want, fire them out, use your group policies to determine which endpoints, get those policies and which patches, and you're pretty much done, right? So it is a very capable solution for being able to bring all those updates inside the perimeter and being able to control the flow and distribution of those, right? So it works. It's a hell of a lot better than that hodgepodge of shit that I showed you earlier. Now, for the traditional enterprise and how they're looking at patch management, it's a lot different, right? Because there's a lot of complexities that go into distributing patches when it comes to having 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 systems globally. How many of you guys work for a large-scale corporation? So you get what I'm talking about. You know the pains. This is kind of that whole, oh shit me. Your Windows Insider build ran into a problem and needs to restart.
Updates.
See you guys. We'll have ice cream at noon.
You're praising Microsoft too much.
Damn it, I forgot to put my well, I forgot to put my cell phone into.
For every vulnerability, you got 5,000 BSRs in your enterprise that have to be patched and tracked, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all the Java bones, all the rest of those, you end up with 500,000 BSRs in a large corporation of instances, and you talk about like a lot of people not patching RSA Archer. Once you build enough data into RSA Archer, applying an update from RSA is a huge undertaking. Mm-hmm. And most people only do it once a year. So it doesn't matter how many patches they come out with.
Yeah, SAP is kind of the same way.
It takes 3 days to rebuild the search index, once you do any kind of a change. So there's a lot of reasons why those corporations don't patch.
Agreed. Another good point. So what happened? Where did I get pissed in front of? Okay, let's try this again, and Mother Mary, please help me. Okay, so the patch release cycle. So what a lot of enterprise organizations go through, and this is actually part of one of the articles that I wrote for ISA or ISACA. It's one or the other, but this graphic, Windows Security Tips, is one of my old sites. There hasn't been touched in a year. But this graphic kind of shows what the typical enterprise has to go through on a monthly basis. First, we're going to have week one where we have those update notification channels, and that's really important for you guys, making sure that as you're expanding your reach into third-party vendors and starting to manage those software updates on a more aggressive cycle, make sure you have appropriate communication channels established with those vendors, whatever mechanism they use for alert notification to their customers. It may be an email. Make sure that email is not going to a single individual. Make sure it's going to some kind of distribution list or ticketing system internally, so that you don't have that single point of failure, essentially. Some of them will have an RSS feed, just a blog site, whatever the case may be, but make sure that you have a means of monitoring that communication channel from that vendor. Determine the applicability. You know, that's one of the first things that you have to do is the applicability and the criticality rating of each one of these CVEs, and knowing if it is applicable to your environment, what the criticality, the risk is to your environment, right? So how many of you guys have an inventory system within your environment for hardware, software? Come on, show of hands. Okay. How many of you actually trust the information within that database? No way. Okay. Just, we're all on the same page here, working from the book, same book. And then it goes through a limited pilot, and this is normally, you know, your virtual machine environments, your test labs, IT, information security, those kinds of folks, people that can fix the issue themselves if it does break. Then they go into pilot testing. This is typically a very limited number of users with cross-representation of different business units, because why? Anybody want to take a stab? Why do we use different business units?
They're using different software.
Right, bingo. Different software, they may even have different hardware, right? I may have tough books out in the, you know, oil rigs off the coast, right? There may be some incompatibility because those tough books have different drivers and software that handle the keyboard and display, right? I have different hardware drivers for this MSI laptop with its keyboard, with its display, graphics, etc. Yeah, that may conflict with a particular update. So make sure you have a good cross-representation of different business units that will have different applications and potentially hardware conflicts as well. So that tends to be about 5 to 10% of the population. If you have, you know, 5,000 users in your environment, you're probably going to have, you know, distribution to around 500, maybe 250. Week 3. You're going to expand that to a larger user acceptance, typically about 20 to 30%, addressing any issues that get identified. That may be some issue with your own builds, with the software configuration. It may be an issue you have to take back to the vendor, whether if that's Microsoft or someone else. You know, these things do happen. And then lastly, full-scale deployment, steady state, controls in place. And then you simply lather, rinse, and repeat, right? Because by the time you get to this point, guess what? Patch Tuesdays happened all over again. You start this process. It's why it's so difficult for most organizations to be able to stay on top of their patching, because guess what? Do any of you have a named headcount in your environment, an FTE responsible for nothing but patching?
Individually or
Yeah.
monitoring?
No, patching, period. That owns your patching process.
Yes.
Yes.
I see 2, 3 out
That's
of.
all they do?
Yeah.
Or they, oh, no.
He's like, nah, shit
No,
on
no.
that. we put that on top of their other responsibilities, right?
Yes.
That's how most organizations operate. Large scale, you know, enterprises, yeah, they do have dedicated patching teams even, you know, because they're not only patching Microsoft and third parties, they're also having to patch internally developed applications as well, right? So it's this constant struggle to stay ahead of the game. And what happens when you have a 0 day that blows this shit out of the water? Yeah? What happens when Intel takes a crap all over your environment? So, anyhow, so the bigger issue, like we talked about earlier, is we have this 90% concept, right? Have I burned that into your mind yet? 90% of the vulnerabilities that exist in the world today have absolutely nothing to do with Microsoft. So we have to fix that issue. But we still have all this other stuff that we're having to manage on a day-to-day basis, right? We can barely get through all of our Microsoft stuff before we're dealing with this. Now, when I talked with organizations and I asked, why are you not bringing your third-party updates for all that other 90% into the same process flow, I hear the same things over and over again, and that's what you just saw up there. We don't have the time, we don't have the resources, and we don't have the right tools. And I get that, man. I get it. I've been in these struggles. I've been doing this shit with patch since 2003 when Microsoft did release that feature pack for SMS. You know, I've been dealing with SMS and SCCM since 1998. You know, and my career took this shift into InfoSec starting back in 2003, looking at patch management frameworks for customers. How were they going to bring that capability into their environment using the tool sets that they already have? So, one of the ways, System Center updates publisher. Now, I didn't see a lot of hands go up when I asked the question earlier, how many of you have SCCM in your environments? There are several hands that went up, and I'm suspecting just because of roles and responsibilities, some of you may not be aware that there is SCCM within your environment. You may not be responsible for it, but most organizations today that are Microsoft-friendly shops that are, I would say, above 1,000 seats probably have SCCM as well. It's almost free for you to bring into your environment. Now, System Center Updates Publisher, while it has that System Center brand, it's part of the System Center family, that whole suite of solutions, you know, System Center Operations Manager, Configuration Manager, Virtual Machine Manager, etc. But this one, it's really about extending and enhancing WSUS, which everybody's pretty much using, right? Now, what it does is basically brings a lot more flexibility and control by being able to integrate all that third-party updates. So the SCUP really fills that void, but we're going to get into some of the issues that I do have with SCUP. But you can see here some of the vendors that are included in that. So I've got an environment here, and damn, did I lose my mouse when that happened? So let me just bring up, excuse me, Updates Publisher real quick. This product is essentially twofold. So it can handle third-party partner updates for integration with WSUS, but it also allows you to patch your own in-house developed applications if you do have those dev teams as well. So as long as you have any of the data around the application, anything from being able to identify the registry, the binaries, the version of those binaries, etc., you could say, go look for it based upon this applicability, and then use this binary to update it, and then use this information, whether if it's from the registry, the file itself, the directory structure, or whatever, to be able to say, yes, it has been patched. Now you can get all that integrated into WSUS and be able to push it out the exact same way you would a Microsoft update. But you can also bring in catalogs from partners. So if I click this URL, oh, I'm not online. Let me see.
Does it integrate with current branch?
What's that?
Does it integrate with current branch?
With current branch?
Yeah, for SCCM.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we're going to, oh, trust me, we're going to get to all that. Okay, I did connect to that earlier. That was actually a pretty slick process for guest Wi-Fi. Did you see that with St. Mary's? I normally never use guest Wi-Fi. I'd use my cell, but anyhow, long story. Their Wi-Fi, when you register, you have to put in your mobile device number, and then it sends you a text with your username and password. I was like, that's pretty slick. I've never seen that before in all the corporations I visit. Yeah. So basically, here's the catalogs that are available in SCUP. Does anybody see an issue with this?
Unsupported software vendors?
Sorry?
Unsupported vendors?
Yeah. Bingo. Give that man an ice cream. See you at 12. Yeah, we're talking Adobe, Dell, HP, Fujitsu. That's it, right? This product was released in 2011. It's had incremental updates and one major update not too long ago, in fact. But yet the number of vendors did not expand. For whatever reason, Microsoft has not been able to garner the attention of the software industry and their partners to be able to publish their updates as a catalog for consumption in SCUP. But remember, you can use these, and just with Adobe, you could probably make some traction with at least keeping Reader and Acrobat up to date, right? If nothing else, it's good for that, be able to bring those updates in. Dell, HP, Fujitsu, you know, being able to keep some of their driver, BIOS updates, those kinds of things. So it does serve a purpose, but also for being able to work with your internally developed applications. So this is one of the solutions that may work for you. Just keep that in mind, that it is available to extend your existing WSUS environment. So continuing on. Now, enterprise capable third-party patching, you know, this is where you end up getting into some of the vendor-based solutions. There is a cost. You know, SCUP is free. You can download it right now. It will work with any Windows 10 system or server if you're working in that environment. You do have to have the remote administration toolkit for it to install on your desktop OS. But it is free. These are not so much, but look at the number of vendors. We have 4 vendors that are in the WSUS catalog. There's, you know, from the third party or from the Microsoft partner solutions that are out there, they're 150 plus. They're pushing over 200 at this point. It's a very competitive space, so they're all competing because their catalogs that have the vendor updates, that's their secret sauce, that's their goal, right? So the more vendors and applications that are in the catalog, the more competitive they become, and they get into this wage war, so to speak, with each other. But because of the way that they work and some restrictions Microsoft has put on the WSUS APIs, these updates are secure by nature because every update has to be signed before it gets published into WSUS. So it will use that's either self-signed or CA provision certificate to sign that update before it gets injected. And this all happens automatically behind the scenes as part of your setup. Most of them will also remove the SCUP requirement. Now, that's very recent, only in the past year and a half for most of these vendors. Before, you were having to inject it into the SCUP catalog, and then it would update from there, or it would actually use the APIs from the SCUP catalog to do that pass-through integration into the WSUS. That's no longer the case today, so it does remove that requirement and gives you basically a solution that you just plug into WSUS, or through WSUS, it will update your SCCM catalog as well. So to your point, both the SCUP product by itself and these third-party vendor solutions will natively integrate into SCCM regardless of what current branch version you're on. So I test regularly with 1709, 18, 11, whatever the case. So or 1711.
So if there's a patch out there that's like basically machine blue screen, you'd be able to like tell I don't want to install that patch until we figure out the next.
Yeah. So you still let me table that one, but yes. I will answer your question, yes, but I'll show you in just a minute.
Okay.
So some of the main players in this space, you may want to take notes of. Actually, I'm hoping we're able to publish all these to the BSides site, but Ivanti, my former employer, I started back when it was Heat Software. Heat and Landesk both merged and formed the Ivanti brand. Now Landesk owned the Shavlik product, Heat owned the Patchlink product. So these two fierce competitors ended up joining, and basically the reason I put Avanti at the top of the list is you had these two fabulous products. And I'm not going to talk shit about Shapley, even though I was on the heat side. I did all the time then. But you know, they were both really good solutions. So what Avanti did was put all the parts on the table, kind of like Apollo 13, right? Said, okay, let's bring them home. This is what we got to work with. And they took the best parts of both solutions, put them together, and now it's called Avanti Patch, I believe. But that's what we're working with. Flexera. This is formerly the Secunia product. Secunia, it's still got some of the automation in there, but it's a little bit more manual in regards to you have to kind of review and approve the updates, but it gives you a lot of control, flexibility. They do some stuff that Avanti does not do as far as their own proprietary criticality ratings of the updates, you know, so that you can kind of prioritize your spend and focus based upon the criticality of the update from the vendor and the applicability and criticality to your environment. So that's kind of a key. If you need that kind of guidance in your patch management, then you may want to look closer at Flexera. Patch My PC's kind of bubbled up from almost the Soho, small office, home office kind of user, to SMB. Now they're getting into that mid-market space. So if you guys are like less than, let's say 2,500 users, this may be a really good solution for you to look at and extremely cheap. I'm talking $1 a seat, right? To be able to bring third-party patching into your WSUS environment and using it to push those updates out. Manage Engine, I highly recommend against. Reason being, and I love that we're in San Antonio, a security consulting firm based here was doing a pen test for one of their customers. That customer happened to be a Manage Engine user. Managed Engine had, it has a web front end. So through their land and expand, you know, escalate privileges and continue to pivot to other systems, they end up on this web server and start to do their pen testing on it and discover 5 vulnerabilities in the Manage Engine product that led to anti-authority system access across the board on all the Manage Engine clients in that environment. I'm sorry, but if you have 5 vulnerabilities and 2 of them essentially give you root access on every client agent sitting out there, you do not belong in the security business. I'm on camera saying that. Get out. Okay. So SCCM third-party software updates. From these vendors, you're going to get full catalog integration, process automation, complete baseline management and reporting, and that is what we're going to look at right now. And I love this new feature in PowerPoint because I tend to do a lot of click-through demos for stuff like this so that no matter what the environment, I can survive just here in PowerPoint. But this is kind of like a live click-through scenario. But did you see how I clicked in through that? I love that. That's a whole new section in this PowerPoint deck. I just found that last week. Okay, so once you've done the initial setup with whatever vendor, now I'm using the slides that I had from my Heat software / Avanti days, but it's the exact same way. Now this is the SCCM environment. It may be new for some of you guys, but just to show the level of integration, because there's not a whole lot with the WSUS as far as, you know, what you're able to do. Like I said, it's good for the SMB space. It will push those updates out, group policy, and you kind of set it, forget it, approve the updates, and you're done, right? You have a lot more control, flexibility, compliance reporting, and capabilities inside of SCCM. And if you're not looking at it and you are kind of that environment, you know, I would even say 500 systems and up, really look at deploying SCCM, not only for software updates. You're going to see some of the other security relevant information here in just a minute. But those of you that were questioning your software, hardware, inventory, I'm not saying SCCM is the best, but they've been at this shit for 20 years and it's pretty damn solid. If you keep your clients healthy, and I'm not talking about the client agent because even it is self-repairing now, but your WMI repository, your admin dollar shares, those kinds of things, then SCCM's a very solid solution. So once you've done the initial configuration and said which vendors you want to bring in, which products you're interested in patching, what's going to happen is it's going to pull down those catalogs. It's going to do some Delta information, figure out what's in your environment already from their perspective, what isn't. And at that point, you can say, okay, yeah, I want to start patching, Acrobat, Flash Player, etc. So at that point, all this stuff starts showing up inside of the SCCM admin console, right next to all of your other updates. So, as you scroll down, there's Adobe Reader, Apple Bonjour, iTunes. Now we're into Microsoft updates, and you can tell that by the name and the bulletin IDs. They're obviously Microsoft. So here we have the exact same, interface that customers would be pushing out the typical Microsoft updates, now with all these other third parties. And I'm talking like 150, 180 different applications that you could bring in, whether if it's to SCCM or bringing it into WSUS and just pushing it out from there. So I can select a bunch of those updates, give it a name. I can use deployment templates inside of SCCM. They'll still be applicable. Target my collection. Go through the rest of the deployment wizard. I'm not going to bore you guys with that. Now, automatic deployment rules, right? Good part of what we need to do is have scale. We're talking about bringing in 150 different applications. You may only take about 12, 15 of those, because they're the most important to you. And rest assured, your 12 or 15 important ones are different than his, right? So that's why those catalogs are so big, give you options. But you can bring in automation to be able to help you adopt all these new versions and applications that you're going to patch, but that doesn't mean you have to add another headcount, right? So how can we automate this? SCCM makes that possible with automatic deployment rules. And you may choose to push out particular updates ad hoc to everyone in the environment. You may want to only use automatic deployment rules for your pilot, or maybe just for your phase one, your IT and InfoSec users, because if it breaks something, they can fix it. Or push it out to your pilot because at least you can automate that part of the patching process. The rest of it, you may want to have a little bit more hands-on control. So here's some of those automatic deployment rules specifying when it was released and the last day, the product's Flash Player hasn't been superseded or expired, should be in there. The vendor is Adobe, then go ahead and push it out. And you'll see which collection you're going to push it to, etc. So I set up these automatic deployment rules based upon whatever selection criteria I want, and as soon as those updates are released, I've targeted a specific collection inside of SCCM for that. Now, some of the other things that we can do is compliance baselines. I'm a huge fan of compliance baselines inside of SCCM. I use them for everything, from the operating system to match the hardening of Windows 10 to CIS or what have you, whatever controls we need to, and being able to have continuous monitoring of their compliance with that particular baseline and making sure I'm controlling the drift. I know what that image looks like on day one from either that gold image DVD or that task sequence in SCCM, whatever process I'm using. I know on day one what it looks like, but I have no clue on day 365, unless I have a solid inventory and a way of being able to monitor the actual compliance or the baseline compliance. So here I have my baselines, create a baseline. Now I'm actually going to use software inventory information to see if my systems are compliant with that baseline or not. Select add, choose software updates. I'm going to expand it, choose Adobe Flash Player, select whichever updates I want, say okay. Now each one of those updates is a CI or a configuration item that goes into that configuration baseline. I take that baseline, target the systems I want to. Now I'm actively monitoring their compliance with those items. And I'm done in like 5 seconds, right? I can assign administrative categories here. I have my patch management, security, and that just plays out later in the reporting, which we're going to get to here very quickly. Let me get through this bit. So now I've provided all my selection criteria, which collection. I'm in all desktop and server clients. You see the date. I can generate alerts if X number or X percentage of systems are not compliant by that specific time frame, and then how often I want to evaluate those systems for their compliance. So all this is fine and dandy. I need reporting, I need visibility. So I need that to happen 2 ways. I need to see a particular endpoint. Maybe I have a compromised system, I've taken it offline. I need to start going through my process. One of the things that I can do is look at their compliance with that particular baseline locally, right? So here is the actual SCCM client agent properties. I go into the configuration, select that particular baseline that I targeted with those CIs, and I say view report. Now I can look at that report locally and determine, is that system compliant with that particular baseline? Now this is just to look at a local system, but there's some good detail in here. As I scroll down, you can see the compliance information, the severity, all the CDE data about that update, which is really helpful. If I select it, copy, paste it into Google, looky there, CDE details, MITRE. Now I know exactly what's going on, but I can also take that particular CDE ID, plug it right into the console, and now I can see all the relevant updates that are applicable to that CDE detail, right? So now I realize that it's not just Adobe that's impacted by that particular update, but Google Chrome is also vulnerable. Would I have had that intel and visibility any other way? So that's basically that. Now the built-in reports give you that bird's eye view. So we just looked at one system. Now what does that collection look like that I targeted, or my overall environment? How secure is it based upon that update? And as you can see here, there's a Adobe update information. Now here's our Microsoft updates. So I'm getting like a bird's eye view of the entire environment based upon that selection criteria. So also some customized reports. This is a community-driven one that plugs right into SCCM. Now we get a lot more detail. And that's pretty much it as far as the integration with SCCM. Any questions on that before we start to wrap up? Okay. So wrapping up, basically just kind of recapping where we're at and what we've covered here. So, ultimately, all these things matter because when it comes to software vulnerabilities and the criticality of these updates that are being released, unfortunately, not every threat actor operates on Microsoft's schedule. Therefore, those 90% of applications out there that are being patched, that vulnerabilities are being published, they're not necessarily happening on Patch Tuesday's schedule. So we have to be able to bring tools, processes, automation, good thinking into that and be able to be much more reactive, because we can't sit down or sit on our ass and wait until Patch Tuesday to be able to do something about it. Now, all the automation controls that you just looked at, the way that we're able to integrate into WSUS, into SCCM, think about how you write your next change control request. And is it for that moment in time, that particular update, or can you theorize how you're going to standardize your patching approach using these tools and processes and get a change control that says you have a blank check. If it fits these parameters that you specified in this automatic deployment rule or this group policy for this particular update classification, criticality, etc. Can you get a blank check from your change control board to let you move forward with automating as much of that process as possible? That's what's going to help you address a higher number of vulnerabilities, much more of that 90% without having so much of the overhead and expense from that management process. So we talked about who the key players are. If you guys need help evaluating this, obviously I'm here, as a resource. I have no problem answering questions. If you want to do a deep dive like a proof of concept, we can talk about that later. So don't want to interrupt or delay. Dan Browder is next, so don't change this channel. Don't go anywhere. Oh, do you? Oh, was there a change fee? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, that's it, y'all. Thank you.
Thanks, Duncan. Just so you guys know, back in the University Center and conference room A, a lot of the sponsors are there handing out some goodies, free beard, swag, and whatnot. So please stop by there.